wonderful panel that we have, and from the company which makes the jets to the companies which makes the technology to create the jet fuel, and we have refiners, and then I think it's a very good full circle panel, and I'm very glad to welcome you all. Today we are going to start just to understand about the context of Indian economy. We have around 1.1 million domestic flight departures in the year 2024 and around 200,000 international flight departures. And then we are going to expand to around 300,000 international flight departures by 2030 and to around 1.65 million flight departures by 2030 in terms of the domestic. So the volume of the total departures are going to significantly increase. Okay, so to start with, Mr. Brian, in terms of being an aircraft builder, how do you see and how important it is to have the traditional jet fuel versus sustainable aviation fuel? To technically, to what extent you can actually blend, and what is the impact of it in terms of the performance of the aircraft?
Yeah. Well, look, the good news is, and you may know this already, but sustainable aviation fuel is a drop-in fuel, so you really don't need any change to the infrastructure on the airplane or on the ground. The current blend limits, to your questions, is capped at 50%. So 50% SAF, 50% traditional jet fuel. That said, Boeing was the first company to fly on 100% SAF in 2018, first on a 777, a 777 freighter, later on a passenger flight on a 737 with United Airlines, and about a year and a half ago across the Atlantic with Virgin Atlantic on a 787. So it's technically feasible to fly on 100% SAF. The reason it's not certified yet, and again, Boeing was the first company to declare that by 2030, all of our airplanes will be 100% SAF compatible. The reason that's not doable just yet is that SAF, as we'll talk about on this panel, is slow to scale. And if you look at SAF consumption last year was about 1% of total jet fuel globally. By 2030, we will have jurisdictions that'll be at 5%, 6%, the UK mandates 10%, but we're not going to be at 50 or above. But we need to make sure as an OEM, as an aircraft manufacturer, that the airplane will never get in the way of scaling. And so we're working very hard to make sure that the airplane is compatible at 100%, but recognizing that no matter where the airplane goes, it may see 100, but then fly to an airport where there's none or 30%. So the variation is what we're trying to de-risk, because some of these synthetic fuels don't have the aromatics in them. And right now the architecture is designed to interact with the aromatics, and the seals, as an example, expand. So we need to make sure, are there any changes to the airplane that need to be done? And or should we just change the fuel? And that's really the hard work that's going on right now. Also at the International Aerospace Environmental Group, IAEG, where we're co-leading a working group on this, together with many of our partners and other OEMs.
Yep. So we have a wide scope to reduce the carbon emissions from what we have, because the blend target, as we understand, can go as high as 50%. But now we are only at 1%. So we have basically the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation for the CORSIA, which says that by 2019-20, whatever was the volume, you should not exceed 85% of that carbon emission volume. Okay, so I want a quick response from the panel in terms of, what do you think in terms of the achievement? Do you think the CORSIA standard is fair, and will the world follow it? Starting with, you can start.
Sure, I think it's a target. We needed one. Where can we just meet the target once we set it? No. what else do we need to meet the targets is an important question. And I think that would be part of the discussion today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just to
Yep.
to jump on the discussion, you were quite optimistic because I think it was more than 0.5 of SAF last year, so we're not reaching 1% yet. And we had a discussion with aviation sector that shows that every time they show that what we need, why do we need SAF as a solution? Because it's to decarbonize the aviation sector is from the one study to the other is from 60 to 75% of the decarbonization comes from the fuel. So you have a lot of efforts to enhance the planes by itself or the operation on the ground, but the fuel is key. And we had a discussion with one of the executives of NASA who was saying, we were stating, what is important is that the transformation of this energy sector. So we do our homework, but as an industry, but what is important is the transformation. And I want to show that as an example for TotalEnergies. You know, TotalEnergies, we were born 100 years ago in Iraq to produce oil, and then we went to refining and produce jet and whatever. But we are in full transformation now, and I would use 3 figures to show that. From the $1 billion R&D per year, we spent around 60 to 70% in low carbon solutions. We are in there. You know, our capex, we invest 1/3 of our capex in renewable energies and low carbon molecules, which is around $5 billion per year. And we will be a low carbon energy by 2050 with a product mix of nearly 50% in renewable energy, 1/4 in low carbon molecules, and still probably 1/4 in oil and gas and LNG. So it shows that transformation is there. And as a company, our ambition for 2030 is to produce 1.5 million tons of SAF, which will be around 7 to 10% of the market worldwide, while we have a market share of jet of 2 to 3%. So we do more than our homework. We are committed to that, but it is clear that the transformation of the energy sector is key to bring the volumes needed by the aviation sector.
Wonderful. So basically, what Mr. Bernard says is, they are using the biofuel business volumes. They want to grow the business volumes and gain their overall market share from the traditional jet fuel producers. So for the companies, it is very important that we catch up with the new technologies and the new products. Otherwise, the market shares will go down. But in terms of the technology that is being used to make the SAF, what is the readiness of Indian markets, Rajiv ji?
See, I mean, because I come from Engineers India Limited, we are basically a technology as well as an engineering company. And I mean, you said how far is the objective that we have to reduce, let us say, the overall carbon emission by 80% by 2050. I mean, unless you set a target, I mean, you cannot make a plan. So obviously, the target setting should be there. Let us say if you want a long-term achievement, and I think industry is responding well to these targets. There are technologies that are coming up to produce SAF. As we being a technology company as well, we have a tie-up with the Indian Institute of Petroleum, which is a lab under CSIR, which is a research kind of a wing of Government of India. And with them, we have developed a technology for producing SAF already that has been demonstrated at pilot scale. And now we are building up a demonstration level scale plant of 20 KLPD. And the quality of SAF that is produced is very well. It is meeting all ASTM regulations, and it is under approval from the ASTM. And this plant that we are setting up in one of the refineries, it will be based on a feedstock mainly used to cooking oil, as well as some of the palm stearin can be also one of the feedstock for this plant. And are targeting that the plant will be completed before the end of 2026. So, I mean, the Indian is also with the demonstration of this technology at this scale, I'm quite sure that we'll be able to have an indigenous technology for the country to produce SAF, which, I mean, as government of India also has mandated that 1% by 2027 blending is required, and then by 2030 we are targeting 5%. So maybe I think 500,000 to 1 million ton SAF production we should target by 2030 for a country like India. And I'm quite sure with the kind of experience that we have and the resources that we are putting up for developing this technology, and we'll be able to meet this national target.
Wonderful. So, as I understand, globally, HEFA is one technology that is widely used, and then we have new emerging technologies, CHJ and ATJ and hydroprocessed hydrocarbon. So, Mr. Erik, from your experience, what are the technologies that are commercially viable, and what is your experience, and what is your lesson to India in terms of the technology?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, LanzaJet, our pathway is alcohol to jet, which basically we start with ethanol and then we can carry it through and produce both sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel. Ethanol, what's interesting about ethanol is there are a variety of different methodologies for creating ethanol. For instance, it can be 1G, 2G, 3G ethanol. 3G is actually industrial off-gases. So with our partnership with LanzaTech, which is our sister company, they have a gas fermentation process that will create ethanol from industrial off-gas, and then we take that ethanol and can produce sustainable aviation fuel. So we are one pathway, and then there are multiple other approved pathways for creating sustainable aviation fuel that are all viable. But one of the points I would like to make, coming back to the first conversation, is this is really not all about technology. We're really building an industry, a new industry. So when we think about the success around sustainable aviation fuel, we have to think about policy and regulation. We have to think about capital markets and bringing in investment to build these facilities. We have to think about other stakeholders, such as the airline industry as off-takers. So it's a very complex, multi-variate equation in order to build this industry. So it's not just a technology question.
Okay. So. And Mr. Alex, would you like to elaborate your experience?
Yeah, sure. Neste is producing SAF based on the HEFA technology or pathway. And this is basically means that we use fats, like used cooking oil and animal fat, to produce the SAF, which is a technology that has enabled us to ramp up to a production capacity of more than 1 million tons, which we have in the refinery in Singapore and in Europe and so on and so forth. I think maybe, as not everybody's an expert in this room, we can kind of trace a bit where we want to go. So 2021, the global SAF production was around 80,000 tons. In 2024, according to IATA, it's about 1 million tons. And in 2050, if we want to decarbonize aviation in line with the net zero pledge of IATA and the long-term aspirational goal and other goals that the industry and ICAO have given themselves, we need more than 500 million. So we need to go from 1 million to 500 million. And that will require every available technology and pathway that there is. HEFA is going to stay there, in my view, because it simply cannot be replaced. First of all, it's a relatively cost-efficient way to produce SAF. But secondly, it is not going to be replaced by anything else, because everything else will need to come on top. And then, of course, we have alcohol to jet. We will have what Neste is also quite engaged in, lignocellulosics, which basically means forestry waste. And then e-fuels are going to play an important role too. Once there is abundant green energy available, which is not the case right now, you will be able to scale up the production of SAF quite significantly. And then one thing will come on top of the other. It's the sum of the things, not either or, one thing or the other. And that's really how we want to do it. And every technology, every pathway, every supplier is welcome to reach those 500 million tons. It will be a stretch and a challenge.
Wonderful. So we need multiple technologies and multiple feedstocks. All in is required because the potential target is quite high. That is the key outcome from the panel discussion. So from the, Mr. Deepak, from the Indian perspective, where are we in terms of the adoption of the new technologies, and do you want to add from the feedstock angle as well as from the technology angle?
Sure, absolutely. Recently, one of the studies came out from a major consulting firm. India could make 8 to 10 million tons of SAF. I think that's an understatement. The population in India is massive. The amount of agriculture we do here is massive. The amount of residues we generate is massive. So India, in my opinion, longer term, if we get the policy right, technology adoption will happen, number one. Number two, India could not just be self-sufficient, but be a massive exporter of SAF globally. And I say that because if I said the same thing about agriculture in 1950s, everyone would have laughed, because India wasn't self-sufficient in agriculture, we're importing. But then Green Revolution happened, technology adoption happened, right? And that shows us now India is globally a net exporter in agriculture, alongside US and Europe, right? India, with right policy, expanded alcohol production 10x, similar to how America and Brazil did decades and 2 decades ago, right? So adoption is not a problem, I think. The ecosystem exists. There are hundreds of millions of talented engineers and farmers and policymakers. All of them need to work together to make this vision a reality. That's one part. Second, coming to the technology and adoption itself, Visolis, as I mentioned, we are a San Francisco Bay Area-based company. We are developers of what I'll call the world's most premium of aviation fuels. And I say premium because our technology works alongside HEFA, alcohol to jet, because we exclusively make these molecules that Brandon earlier alluded to, aromatics and cycloalkanes. These are highest energy density molecules. That's what our technology makes. It's the same grade of fuel that would send a rocket into space. We're working with the US Department of Defense because they're very excited about that promise, right? So we talked about what's happening today, but to get to from 1 to 500, we'll need new things. This is an emergent system, and we need to treat it as an emergent system, not a well-defined system where you can prescribe, thou shalt blend 50% this, 20% that. That style of policy making is detrimental, because that is anti-innovation and anti-progress. I like and commend India on the biofuels policy. It's unusual, but alcohol does not have one price in India. As a biofuel, if you make it from a certain input, it fetches a price. If you make it from a different input, it fetches a different price. And the government pretty much adapts the policy stance every year. We'll need something similar in SAF, right? And the last point here is energy should not be treated as, oh, we need to do the same thing globally. Each place is different, and energy needs to be treated from a risk-reward perspective. It's a portfolio. There'll be some things which are lower risk, some things which are higher risk. For example, everyone probably here is familiar, you won't advise a 30-year-old and a 50-year-old with the same stock portfolio. So you will not advise India, Europe, US with the same energy portfolio. It will be dependent on the local resources and raw materials. So in Europe, in the future, maybe there's clean, abundant electricity, and how best to export or use electricity. I think the jury is out there. I, as a chemical engineer, have a very strong opinion about that, which would probably be against most on the panelists, but we can save that for later. liquid fuels are going to be the future for SAF. No doubt about that. Long haul, there is no other technology on horizon that we can think of. I will say, if you're thinking futuristic, within our lifetimes, at least one person in this room will make a trip from US to India in 30 minutes.
Yep. So, very futuristic,
do you-
ambitious.
It's a different company.
Brian, do you know what I'm talking about? It's the Earth-to-Earth concept. You strap yourself on a rocket, like a SpaceX one,
Yeah.
it launches,
Yeah.
and instead of going to space, it comes back. And you can be on anywhere on Earth within 30 minutes.
Good luck.
Yep. So in terms of the feedstock, as Mr. Deepak did made some comments about the India, we did achieve very good, almost reaching 19% blend in the gasoline or petrol that is used in India. Today, in the year 2024, the gasoline consumption is 39.45 million metric tons, or close to 0.9 million barrels per day. And the diesel consumption in India is 91.94 million metric tons in 2024, close to 1.88 million barrels per day. So while you are doing 19% blending in gasoline, your blending in diesel is very less. Okay. So if you see this 19% blending, there are multiple feedstocks, and Government of India is giving multiple different price points, even though the end product is the same based on the feedstock that is used. So we are expected to blend 9.8 billion liters in the ethanol supply year of 24-25. That is from November 2024 to October 2025. So we are currently using C-heavy molasses, B-heavy molasses, and sugarcane juice, which are all cane based. Then we are using the rice, basically the damaged rice by Food Corporation of India, and we are also using corn. So corn and broken rice is very high. Like say in 24-25, the maize or corn based supply is close to 4.25 billion liters, and broken rice is 1.07 billion liters, and sugarcane based is close to 4.5 billion liters, and the FCI rice, that is Food Corporation of India rice, is around 1.1 billion liters. So there is a very good composition of this particular thing, but per liter the price is ranging from 65 rupees to 80 rupees per liter, basically depending upon the feedstock. So we are able to bring in that particular revolution, like say the corn production, which was around 22 million tons, has now gone to 34-35 million tons. In India, before we had 2 seasons, Kharif and Rabi. That is the now we are doing in 3 seasons. Even in summer also we are doing the corn production. So farmers are responding, and it is a very good story. But in terms of the diesel, your diesel consumption is quite high, but we are not able to meet the diesel requirement, the blending requirement, because India imports close to 16 or 15 million tons of vegetable oil, whether it is palm oil or soybean oil or sunflower oil or rapeseed oil. You significantly import that volume. So for the sustainable aviation fuel, you have to use more of oils and less of alcohols, but we do have some technology. So how do we see that composition evolving from the Indian market, and what is the experience of it in Europe and other places in terms of, alcohol based or oils based? What do you think?
I think Alex said it really well. We're not going to pick winners or losers.
Exactly.
You have to have, what you have to do is there has to be an S in SAF. It has to be sustainable. And we work very closely with the Roundtable for Sustainable Biomaterials, which has sort of like a 12-point plan to certify whether your SAF is actually sustainable or not. So they look at indirect land use change, the competition with food, the competition for water, the socioeconomic conditions that this feedstock enhances. And I think that is that standard, or a standard like it, is important to embrace and adopt. But the last thing we should be doing is picking winners and losers. Let the market decide. The good news is we have collectively de-risked these technologies and created these pathways that are certified now.
Nice. So
Yes.
what is your experience in Europe?
This is
in
exactly
terms of
what I wanted to
competition?
say, that when we talk to regulators and they try to find a solution, but let's do the market find the solution, because at the end, what is also important is the price. And at the end, someone will have to pay the bill. So if you go, when we had discussion with the European Commission for refueling aviation, some of them, they wanted to go straight to e-fuel. So my answer was, it's a good idea, but let's see each other in 10 years' time, and then we continue the discussion. So leave the market, what do you want? The objective is to decarbonize, so you let the market do its job. And we need all of us here with different technologies. The maturity is different, but it, as you exactly said, it adds up, but we had to explain to all our counterparts that it adds up. Don't choose, because we need them all. And even I want to take a step back as oil and gas and refiner. Our first step is the co-processing, is that we co-process biofeedstock in our fossil fuel refineries. It makes it already decarbonized. That's the first step. That's probably the cheapest. It brings the first volumes. Then you have the FA technologies that is much needed. With that you can have neat SAF that you can transport and blend whenever you need it. So this is and then we go for alcohol to jet, and then other technologies, and then later eSAF will be more expensive. So, but it will be when we reach the point that we don't have enough feedstock for the other technologies, and then it's complementary, and then you build on that, and hopefully we reach the target of 2050. But please, let's not choose for a technology, because the market will solve it by itself.
So as a follow-up question, you said the same refinery, we should have multiple technologies, means some renewables and some the hydrocarbons. Okay. So I understand in United States and lot of renewable diesel plants have been set up. But now with the new President Mr. Trump coming in, what kind of role the policy instability plays in the overall, planning and production. So, is it wise to have a switchable technology, or how are you going to face the policy uncertainty?
That's it, but my colleagues will probably better answer for the US, but we know for Europe. The key is the stability and the visibility. So that's why we love the Refuel EU Aviation. It's not perfect, but at least it gives the timing, and we have the perspective. As an investor, what we want to see, where is the market going, what is the demand, and do we have a stable demand? Can we build on that to invest billions of dollars in facilities? But it's not enough, because you need regulation, you need technology. So there must be a demand, there must be a technology, because you have to be able to produce. But as you mentioned, then you need the feedstock. And one of the key thing when we take an investment decision is to secure the feedstock. As an example, we are transforming our refinery, old refinery in south of Paris, in a biorefinery. We stop the crude, and then we transform it in a biorefinery to produce the SAF mainly. And we made a joint venture with one of the main feedstock suppliers in Europe to secure, because otherwise you have a lot of volatility in this market, and you don't know. And this is a nightmare of an investor: is that you have a plant, you have a demand, you have the technology, it works, but you don't have feedstock, so you cannot produce. So this is really key. And now we are talking about HEFA, used cooking oil, animal fats, but we need to build on a new feedstock. So we are here talking with partners, for example, on intercrops, cover crops, which is eligible by the regulation. It's not in competition with food and feed, but will probably bring a new revenue for the farmers, and at the same time bring a new volume accessible for the SAF industry. but my colleagues probably know more about US.
Yeah, so, you know, the U.S. approach to supporting the industry has, you know, been based on incentives. So, you know, basically tax credits, whereas other markets around the world, you know, have more of a stick approach with mandates and so forth. But the challenge that we're facing in the United States right now is that there's ambiguity around, you know, what type of feedstock can qualify for tax credits. And there's also unintended consequences where certain feedstock is being rewarded for going into the road transport industry versus aviation. So it's very difficult right now to make economic decisions on you know, where and how to build a production facility in the United States, because the regulatory and policy structure is in a period of sort of uncertainty. So unfortunately, I think at this moment in time, there's a lot of pause in the US market because of this lack of certainty and visibility on policy.
And I think if we talk about policy, so first of all, without policy, the ramp up of SAF is simply not going to happen. It's as clear as that. You do need policy support because people are not going to invest billions of dollars. If you want to have a sizable SAF refinery, you're looking at $1 to $2 billion if you have a large output. It's a lot of money. And you need to make a business case for that. And based on the demand that you have without policy, which is incentives or mandates, it's simply not going to happen. Now, if we look at the policies, there is the mandates, which by the very nature, and I'm very happy to hear that India is planning to introduce a mandate for international flights in 2027. That's going to give a really good signal and a very important nudge to sort of, you know, start the production and the investments. And then there is the incentives. Now, I think everybody likes more a carrot than a stick, obviously. It's probably a combination of both that works really well. I think by its nature, mandates are more stable. So, you know, you have RefuelEU in Europe. Even if there's a new commission, if there were a new commission that wanted to abolish this, you can't just take it away. You would probably have like claims and damages. And so you can really rely on that a bit more. Whereas incentives, if there is a change in the administration, there might be some uncertainty around it. In my view, it is actually the combination of both. Also in Europe, there is quite a few incentives, the you know, EU ETS allowances, so there's quite a bit of incentive to also help the people that have to pay for this, or the companies that have to pay for this. If you combine both, you're going to get that momentum going. But I have to say, despite the uncertainty we have in the US, the fact that the US is leading the SAF ramp up globally, there's a lot of SAF, a lot of production, a lot of momentum in the US, is because they have a very smart policy which involves heavily, of course, the incentives. And so that's also important, and mandates alone are probably going to be a bit difficult.
Do you want to respond on the policy stability and uncertainty?
So it's a fool's errand to kind of predict what politicians would do. That's number one. Let's keep that in mind, especially some of the new administration, right? But one thing that President Trump has very clearly said, he wants energy abundance. He didn't say which one. It includes a few thousand, let's say, beneficiaries of the oil and gas boom. It also includes millions of farmers in the Midwest. The challenge is the policy that was created under President Biden's administration, it basically brought incentives for SAF in line with renewable diesel, which already existed. It did not go over it. It did not come in to support SAF. It came in to level the playing field. But if you look under the cover there, they were overzealous on the CI value that they shot themselves in the foot. Like alcohol to jet would totally work, yep. But LanzaJet cannot use domestic alcohol because of the CI value not meeting the requirements.
That's correct.
If you had just moved that number 10% lower, it would have worked out. Yep. and everyone would have been happy. And we are in a stalemate right now. What a weird situation, right? Like how were you thinking about the policy? Like, going back to my original comment, each region will have its own domestic policy based on what's most appropriate for that region. And policymakers need to think of it that way. There is a lot of chatter about, oh, it's a global business, global this, global that, but it has to make regional sense first, right?
And I think the good news for India is that, look, there are some really good case studies. Alex gave the example of Refuel EU. The United Kingdom has a mechanism underway. There's a 10% mandate by 2030, which is very sporty. But they're consulting right now on what's called a contracts for difference, or a revenue certainty mechanism, which de-risks the purchasers and the producers. So if the price falls below a certain point, an incentive kicks in for a period of time so that the producers don't go bankrupt. And if the price rises, again, the reverse happens to make sure that passengers can keep affording the fuels. So that's one idea, carrot and stick combination. Singapore is looking at a levy, a mandatory levy, on all incoming flights. Now, Singapore has the luxury of being on an island and controlling that ecosystem. But again, it's very innovative, raising between 1% and 3%, or generating about a 1% to 3% SAF target by a ticket tax ranging from $3 to $16, depending on the class of service, taking that money, auctioning off SAF, and putting it right back into the fuel farm. So there are lots of examples out there. The blender's tax credit in the United States at federal and at state level, which stack. So I think India is in a really good position to almost pick and choose and to learn what's worked and what didn't. And there are basic things, like right now you tax your regular jet fuel significantly. So what about a tax break on SAF and incentivize it that way? So that's not a new revenue source, but it's basically giving you credit for flying on SAF versus having to be taxed on jet fuel. So I think India's in a really good position to.
That's kind of the mechanism they used for ethanol.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And
carbon.
the benefit with India is that the oil marketing firms, companies, are majority government owned. Yep. And government can say, thou shall, for the greater good of the country and the world, and it happens. And it happened in the last 7 years.
Yep.
Went 10x in 5 years. That 10x can happen. From 1 million, we can get to 10 million. If the OMC said, we'll open a tender where we will purchase this much amount, but hey, Mr. Prime Minister, can we get a tax break if we purchase that amount, right? Like, that's already been done. Like, there's nothing new to invent. We just need to learn from what we've already seen succeed.
Yep. I think while India is at the inflection point to start with, India international aviation emissions were reported at 4.6 million tons of carbon dioxide, CO2 emissions, 4.6 million tons in 2022, and they are projected to reach 10 million tons by 2030. So overall, this is for the international flights. If you add the domestic plus international, we will be around 25 million tons of CO2 emission. So if you want to follow the CORSIA targets, by 2030 you need 1.8 million tons of sustainable aviation fuel oil, and if you want to meet the 5% blending target, we need a feedstock of only 237,000 tons.
Can I just clarify one thing? So CORSIA, the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, there's an O and there's an R. And what you keep talking about, the R, reducing your emissions through SAF, which is wonderful, and that's a great incentive to fly on SAF. But there's also the O, which is an offsetting scheme that CORSIA has enabled, where there are eligible out-of-sector credits that can be purchased. So I just want to clarify for the audience that you have multiple levers to be CORSIA compliant. But yes, it can serve as a wonderful incentive, if you want to call it that, to uptake more SAF.
And for the moment, offsetting is much cheaper than SAF. So there is no room for SAF for the moment in CORSIA, unless it's mandatory, because it's much more expensive to reduce your emission by with SAF than reducing the emission by offsetting. So, but it's a good system to stabilize, because the aviation sector has a problem that it's a good problem that is increasing. So by itself, the emissions should naturally increase. So they decided to stop the increase by offsetting, but it is done by offset and not by SAF.
Let me be clear, right? Offsets are extremely contentious, right? The quality control is not non-existent. It's emerging. It's emerging, right? Like there's so much scandal. So I think like the industry will need to be very careful to not get mired into scandals, even if they're doing the good work, doing the right work, right? I'll give an example here, right? The US incentives, the carrot and stick, the carrot part, it translates, if you stack up all the incentives, to of the order of $400 per ton CO2 if you're selling SAF. If you're buying something which is a certified carbon credit, for example, doing biochar, it's $250 a metric ton, right? But we can't, let's say, legislate or get out of emissions by just putting biochar on the ground. We'll need new technologies. If that's the solution, we just burn everything and put all on the ground, and we don't need any new technologies, no HEFA, no alcohol to jet, no rocket fuels from us, right? So offsetting is a part of the portfolio, and that's an important thing to point out. And the risks associated are also important to learn.
Yeah, I think we do have a lot of examples in terms of, the United States market of RIN, that is the RIN credits and the way it gets traded. It's a well-evolved market. We need to do more evolution of such kind of a, offsetting mechanism, and RIN credit trading should be brought into the Indian markets. Having said that, Mr. Rajiv, you were telling about that by 2030 we should probably do 1 million tons of SAF basically. So if you want to do between 1 to 1.8 million tons, how prepared is the overall Indian industry and policy makers mechanism? And how do you see, when do you see that inflection point coming to India in terms of the adoption?
See, I must tell you that all the OMCs are actually working on all available options even now. Some refiners are putting SAF plants based on HEFA technology. Some refiners are, let us say, they want to use the existing infrastructure or hardware available in terms of the hydrotating units available. So they are talking of co-processing, and some of them are even talking of alcohol to jet. So I mean, as told by the co-panelists, that all technologies will work together, and is not a single solution which will meet the requirement. And as the feedstock is definitely a challenge, aggregation of the feedstock is definitely a challenge, whether it is a HEFA-based technology or let us say even to alcohol to jet, considering that from where that alcohol is coming, probably the 1G alcohol may not be so much of useful in terms of carbon offsetting. So people are looking for 2G technologies as more suitable. And then the economics part of it also plays a role. So I mean, right now the industry is already started kind of a baby steps as of now, and it has to be supported by the government policies, which I would say still not in place, and they are being discussed at the government level. And the incentive, the carbon incentive policy is also being talked of very vigorously within the government of India, and a nodal agency has been formed, and maybe a policy we should expect in a year or so on the carbon, the carbon emissions and carbon crediting system within the country. So I think that will all have a kind of a positive impact, and the economics of these plants will work out. That is what my take is.
So today in Delhi, where we are sitting, the prices of the traditional aviation jet aviation fuel is 95,500 rupees per ton, which is around $1,110 per metric ton. And the SAF price in United States is around $1,950 to $2,000 per ton. Okay, so you have a big price gap. The aviation fuel is $1,100 and the SAF is $2,000. You almost have close to 45, 50, 100% gap basically, $1,100 and $900 gap. So, and at the same time, if India is a very price-sensitive market, because we have seen in the previous decade some of the airlines kind of going off the business because they could not manage the high fuel costs. They were not able to pass on, and so a lot of bankruptcies has happened. So in this context of of that having the impact on the commercial flights vis-a-vis this scheme. What do you think in terms of, how do we make this commercially viable, and to what extent the government should support?
Well, like, would you pay the same price for a computer and a typewriter? No, right? You can type on both of them, but they're totally different products. They have different benefits. And SAF has different benefits than a petroleum jet A, and it needs to be compensated for. There are benefits I can maybe qualify. Number one is just carbon emissions are lower. Number two, there's contrail formation which happens, which is emerging science today, which is responsible for almost as much, if not double, of the greenhouse warming potential of aviation relative to just the carbon burning. SAF does not come with impurities like polycycloaromatics, which come from petroleum jet, which cause contrail formation, right? So we are massively under-accounting for the benefits that SAF provides. Other benefits, like if I keep going on that, right, portfolio risk management, would you rather make a few thousand people who benefit from crude oil by paying $1,100, or India being a welfare state, we pay $2,000 and a big chunk of that goes to the farmers? The ethanol business has shown that to us. 70% of what you pay at the gas station goes to the farmers. And India has historically been a net importer of crude oil, massively impacting its currency situation. It continues to depreciate. So from India's perspective, yes, we need to invest in the capital, because today it might look like it's $2,000, but $2,000 would be translated into, I don't know how much that rupees would be, like 160 something, right? That rupees might, in dollar terms, be lower in the future. And you've got to plan for the future when you're investing in an asset which is going to be there for 30 years. You can't just say that, oh, it's 2x today, so I'm not going to do it. Europe did that with solar, 5x more expensive. Today, solar is cheaper. So don't judge the kid based on what kid can do today. Make sure the kid has the resources to become strong and powerful in the future.
Mr. Brian, on commercial mismatch or viability?
Yeah, well, look, Alex and I were comparing notes earlier. There's 80% of the world has never set foot on an airplane. They deserve to, and we want to make sure they get to do that sustainably. The percentage here in India is even higher. And the price sensitivity in India and the lack of elasticity is one of the highest in the world. That said, when you break it down on a per ticket price, you're talking about a couple of dollars. So that's one. The other point just made is the cost of carbon is rising, right? The cost of emitting globally is rising. So you have to factor that in. We haven't talked much about that. The next point is, and we haven't talked much about the scope 3 attributes that the airlines can pass on to corporate customers, who all, and many of them have net zero targets by 2050, has proven to be a source of revenue for the energy manufacturers, but also for the airlines. So there are multiple levers that you can pull to bring in, to basically bring that green premium down. The last point I'll make is, we have exclusively talked today about producing SAF in India, which is most important, right? We need production here. But we also need to work on a global booking claim system, when there's lots of progress being made by IATA and others, to make sure that this SAF doesn't have to end up in the wing for you to be able to get credit, just like renewable electricity doesn't have to be produced in your backyard for you to have renewable electricity at home.
Yep. Mr. Bernard, on the price mismatch, you want to give a last comment? We are kind of closing down.
We do our best, because we work for our customers to have the lowest price possible. And airlines are very sensitive to price, as their customers, final customers, are sensitive. The good news or the bad news is that fossil fuels is very cheap and abundant, and probably alternative to decarbonize will remain more expensive for a long period. And when we talk about less developed technologies, we see that probably we already produce the cheapest with co-processing and FR. We produce cheapest. So I wouldn't be too optimistic that to dream that the price will be the same. Otherwise, we will be disappointed. But we do whatever possible to reduce, and by the size of the industry, probably we will solve a part of the equation.
Yeah, I think in India we are innovating well. The food safety standards, we have FSSAI standards. So when you are using the cooking oil, you should not use more than 5 times of frying. So we are expecting that the government of India will make that implementation of the regulation that you should not boil or use the cooking oil for more than 5 times. And when the oil marketing company starts procuring the used cooking oil at a particular price, I think that will significantly improve the health of the nation, because you don't use too many times of the boiled oil. And at the same time you will get the feedstock at a reasonable price. As long as our feedstock price is around $1,000, $1,100, I think that is what the government is targeting. It will automatically become viable and it will be automatically be successful. That is what we should try on. Your closing comments, Mr. Rajiv, then you get each one of you.
Just to come back on the effect on the cost that it has. So I think we have to acknowledge that the energy transition is not going to come for free. If you look at net zero, what you can do, there's a couple of things. There is technology, which is modern aircraft. There is SAF is the sharpest knife in the box. There is organizational matters like air traffic management, which can be improved, and flying at the right level to produce less contrails and whatnot. Nobody thinks this has come for free. So if you think you're going for a more modern aircraft, and I think when I landed, I saw a Boeing 757, which is an older model, and I think the equivalent would now be a 737-10 or whatever. And so it's probably, I don't know what the lower emissions and fuel consumption is, but it's probably 30-40% or something like that. But nobody would think this comes for free. If you want a more modern aircraft, then you have to buy it and pay for it, obviously. But if you look at SAF, apart from the fact that fossil fuel is too cheap because it doesn't reflect the cost and the damaging effect on the environment it has, that is also going to be more expensive for the foreseeable future. And it's normal. It's actually, so we have to accept the fact that if we want to decarbonize aviation, if aviation wants to keep their license to operate, it will be more expensive. Now, the cost on a ticket, like Brian said, is actually true. The cost on a ticket is not that huge. It's a couple of dollars per ticket. If you look at Singapore with the new regulation, the levy is not extremely high. Even IATA says that if you were to spend, I think it's $4.7 trillion the industry would have to spend to get to net zero, that would actually be a 17% increase on a ticket, which, if you look at the number, 4.7 trillion is like unimaginably high, but 70%, yeah, it's a lot, but it's not that you think it couldn't work. Now, this is going to happen, and yes, India is a very price-sensitive market. My view is, from the outside, coming from Europe, is that the ticket prices are rather high, and from an airline's perspective, seem to be quite healthy. If you look at, if you want to fly to Mumbai tomorrow from here, it's in Europe, my son flies from Germany to Morocco for 29 euros. That is amazing. I don't think you have that here, right?
Yeah, no, here government is very proactive. We collect more taxes and keep for future.
So the question is, with those with those margins, do you have is there room to add a couple of dollars to make it more sustainable? Because otherwise, aviation growth is not going to happen on a global basis.
Yep. Rajiv, you want to do the closing remarks, and then we go to Erik, because we have last 4 minutes.
I must very much agree with all panelists that the price part, definitely, it is too optimistic to say that the price of the SAF will be same as the conventional jet fuel. It is too far. It is, of course, I mean, it will be bridged by, let us say, the development in the technologies. For the HEFA technologies, we have more, maybe we can optimize on the hydrogen consumption with more selective catalysts. So all that will reduce that gap, but that gap, you cannot expect it to be zero in the coming future. And some of it has to be borne by the passengers who are basically using the aviation, and and some of it has to come in the form of some taxation policy. India being a agrarian economic, so it has an advantage the way the alcohol has said that a lot of it has gone to the farmers. So that is what, if that kind of a policy may help to bridge the gap.
Mr. Erik, on the commercial viability and your closing remarks.
So closing remark, just quite simply, is at LanzaJet, we consider India to be one of the most exciting markets for sustainable aviation fuel. The aviation sector in India is soon to be the world's largest. India has just an abundance of carbon-rich feedstock. And the policy, there's a commitment to developing the policy and regulatory environment here. And to echo an earlier point, India is in an excellent position to look to see what has worked well in other markets as they think about their own policy and regulatory schema. So we are just extremely excited about what's happening in India, particularly when certain other markets in the world may be lessening their commitment to the energy transition. We're heartened by what's happening here in this country.
Yep. So wonderful discussion there. So we need to build multiple feedstocks and then multiple technologies, and price also has to be viable. But I think we will have the mechanism to figure out feedstock and the product around $1,100-$1,200 per ton, and we will make it very successful, because in the Indian economy structure we have 15% of our GDP comes from agriculture as compared to the world average of 4.4%. So India is an agriculture driven economy. So if you are giving a bit more money, as Mr. Deepak said, to the farmer will benefit. At the same time, we also have the crude oil imports. Last year were around close to $180 billion, and the trade deficit is $245 billion. So we are positioned in a very kind of a sweet spot in terms of trying to reduce the imports and then give a bit more money to the agriculture sector. But at the same time, 31% of our economy is the manufacturing. So it needs very cost efficient supply chain. If today we are growing below 6% in manufacturing, if we have to realize our aspirations of India's growth story, we will definitely go to 5 trillion from the current levels of 3.8 trillion, but we need to grow at 8 to 10%. For that, manufacturing has to grow into double digits, for which it needs a very cost efficient fuel and very efficient supply chain. So these two are the policy pillar challenges, and I am sure that we will discover a way, and then meeting 1.5 million tons of SAF demand, I think it should not be a problem. We all brace for the story, and I thank each one of my panel members for this engaging and enlightening discussion. And as they say in the Guru movie, I am leaving the last 10 seconds as a dividend, and we are closing on time. Thank you very much.